think it's wonderful that we have a strong contingent of Australians this year, and our next speaker is Professor Gillian Gould. She's a public health researcher, a tobacco treatment specialist, a GP dedicated to improving the health of First Nations communities in Australia. She is Professor of Health Equity at Southern Cross University, where she leads transformative projects, including the NHMRC Global Alliance for Chronic Diseases funded iSISTAQUIT scale up to support smoking cessation among pregnant First Nations women, and SISTABIRTH, a birthing on country initiative. So it's my pleasure to introduce Gillian to you today. So I'm very happy to be here today.
You can use this if you want.
Thank you. And so what I'm going to talk about today is a book actually I'm writing, in progress writing, which I'm calling Stronger Together. And it's going to be stories of Indigenous and Jewish collaborations and exploring shared histories, identities, and spiritual connections. So I just want to pay respect to some of my ancestors that came from Russia and Poland. These are some of my great-grandparents, and who really, I suppose, sought a safety in those countries and escaped when there was rising anti-Semitism and pogroms at the end of the 19th and early 20th century. And in my exploration of my family history, I found that the family members that did stay behind mostly perished in the Holocaust. I am an Indigenous person from this country here, and that's how I commonly introduce myself when I'm talking to other Indigenous people, if I think it's safe enough to do so. But like just being here is really testimony, as with many of you also in the room, to our resilience and survival. So the genesis of this program, and I apologise for some of the small font. I was trying to correct that, but anyway, I hope you can read it. So I have a 20-year history of collaborating with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people to have better strategies to improve their health in Australia. And after October 7th, I was really saddened to see some of those Aboriginal people marching against Israel, for Palestine, maybe even for Hamas. And I guess it was a bit of a heart sink for me. And I decided I needed something to help me focus on the positive. So the idea for this book was stimulated by hearing other stories like similar to mine, where there had been cross-cultural collaborations between an allyship between Indigenous peoples and Jewish people, some of which are known and some of which are just really the quieter achievements. First of all, I'd just like to quickly mention our projects of pregnant women, just to show you what I've been doing to give context. And as Cherie mentioned, our main program is called iSISTAQUIT. It stands for Implementing Supporting Indigenous Smokers to Assist Quitting, where we try and help pregnant mums who still have a prevalence of 43% smoking to quit smoking for their own health and the health of their baby and the community. And now we have a birthing on country program, which is called SISTABIRTH, to bring back some of those cultural practices around birth. And Sister Screen is a new program to do cervical screening in pregnancy. And the initiation of my first project, iSISTAQUIT, the main one, was really developed with me as a Jewish person, Israelis as well, with Professor Yoel Bar-Ziv, who's here at the Hebrew University, who was my first PhD student. And so there's been that collaboration. So that's really why I'm kind of looking at other people who are collaborating. So this wasn't a research project. I was taking more of a journalistic kind of approach to talking to people, and they all knew they were going to be named and their stories were going to appear in my book. I've so far spoken to 23 people, 9 of whom are Indigenous and from different nations. So Aboriginal people from Australia, we have, I've spoken to Maori people from New Zealand, Canadian First Nation and Native Americans, 14 Jewish people, and two of the people of those Jewish people are also Indigenous to other nations. And mostly that was by video conference, recorded and had AI transcribe them, and then pulled together some themes for this presentation today. So some of the themes that have come out. So interwoven histories of survival and resistance. People have talked to me about, there's been similarities, as we heard from Nova Perez before, about, the shared history of trauma and colonization, and genocide that have happened, that's in common between different Indigenous nations and the Jewish people. And that has formed a basis for mutual understanding. And for example, I talked to Harry Laforme, who's an Anishinaabe First Nations Canadian. He was the first Indigenous Court of Appeals judge in Canada, who told me of how the British took control of everything, in the lives of First Nation people to their detriment, and created a legal fiction which was similar to terra nullius that the Australians had imposed, Aboriginal people had imposed on them. I also talked to Barbara Pickett, who's an Aboriginal educator in Australia, and she belongs to a long-running women's talking circle called Kubadis. She described a very frightening experience she had when she was younger, of being forcibly doused with pesticides because there was some outbreak in the community, and that brought her to mind for her the awful things that she'd heard about concentration camps and the Holocaust. I talked to Adam Louis Klein, who had research with the Dazana people. You'll probably hear from him later, and in the Amazon, and how they have parallel connections to the Jewish people in relation to their sense of being chosen, and despite their cultural differences. So all of these type of stories come under that theme. Another theme of allyship and justice and mutual empowerment. So just hearing, for example, from different advocacy that Jewish people have done historically, and how Jewish people have supported each other. So I mentioned the Kurbadi's yarning circle, which was founded really for women to actually support Aboriginal people in the community. But post October 7, it was almost like, the support needed to turn around the other way. And Jewish women who at the beginning were actually reluctant to even declare their, religion or cultural affiliation, were somehow encouraged to do so. I mean, I think one person mentioned they were Jewish, and then there was a few Jewish people popped up as members of the group, and really received wonderful support from those Aboriginal people in the group. I can't even read this myself, oh my goodness. And then there's been, for example, a Jewish man called Ben Levi from New Zealand who has done some wonderful work advocating for Latin American Indigenous people. There's a group called Stand Up in Australia, where a group of Jewish people formed an association just to stand up for Aboriginal people. And I talked to one of their philanthropic supporters, Renee Pinshaw and Courtney Winter-Peters, and they talked about some marvellous programs they have where they have exchanges between remote Indigenous communities and Jewish communities where people go and visit each other, break bread together, share each other's culture. So those are very heartening. Cultural expression and storytelling. So there've been lots of incidences where music has formed a connection. And for example, hearing from Norman and Barbara Miller from Australia, who have had events where, they have had, on one hand, the didgeridoo playing, being played by Aboriginal people and the shofar being played by Jewish people. We've had choirs of Jewish people going out to the outback, singing songs, having some of those songs translated into Aboriginal languages, having some of the and vice versa. So just getting together, singing, beautiful artwork that for example, you saw Avraham Vovsi's beautiful artwork in the foyer and the wonderful work he's done with capturing portraits of Aboriginal activists. And another man in Darwin, a Jewish man who is in the business of creating animation films that have been used he's worked closely with Aboriginal organisations to get health messages across easily. And then, there have been the sort of complex identities that have come up where people have had a background, either from a Jewish ancestor or they're Jewish themselves, or they've had some sort of influence from Judaism growing up, and then have really been exploring these sort of identities and felt very supported by the Indigenous Embassy of Jerusalem for undergoing that sort of exploration. For example, I spoke to a hereditary chief of a North American tribe who had Jewish ancestry that he's very proud of. I've spoken to Laura Medley, who was brought up with very much a Jewish influence in her life, and how she has made multiple trips to Israel and gone back and advocated for us as Jewish people. And then sometimes that can be challenging, obviously, especially in the recent climate. Now, there's been quite a lot of educational collaborations. So there's a Jewish school in Sydney, Australia, called the Emmanuel School, and they have wonderful programs where they have camps together with Aboriginal youth, and they take primary school children from the Emmanuel School and high school children all the way up to places up north in Australia, and have joint camps, joint events, cultural sharing, getting to know each other. And in turn, those Aboriginal students have come down and experienced a bit of city life. So building those bridges. We've had also postgraduate students who've done their PhD, like some non-Indigenous people have done their PhD, they're Jewish and they're doing a PhD on Indigenous topics. And we've also had Indigenous people who've studied, like for example, Nina Gray, who came and studied with Wayne Horowitz and worked for him, looking deeply into the history of this country. I also have a colleague who's another GP who's Aboriginal, and she went on a program at the Hebrew University here to do her Masters in Public Health. And she was the third Indigenous student from Australia to actually undertake that program. And that program is supported by Jewish philanthropists who want to make sure that Aboriginal students in Australia have these opportunities. So there's this wonderful projects where people are connecting through education. And then there's also more recently collaborations to challenge, some of the recent awful things that are happening. And Norman Miller told me about a program he's developed about anti-Semitism, to promote, to counteract anti-Semitism. They're taking into schools up in their area and hope that more schools will take it up. So there's some wonderful, wonderful things that are happening there. And then, of course, language revival, which brings its own cultural healing. This is a map of Australia and all the different language groups in Australia. There used to be a lot more, but there's 250 language groups in Australia. So you can see that Australia is very diverse in itself. Like there's no homogeneity between all Aboriginal people. But I spoke to Gilad Zuckerman, who is a linguist who developed the concept of revivalistics, and he has been instrumental in bringing back a lot of Aboriginal languages that were either dead or near dead through taking principles of how Hebrew was revived and applying those to Aboriginal languages. And he advocates that, Aboriginal communities should be compensated for their loss of their language, similar to really what they should be compensated for loss of their land. Not that that's really happening as such. And then, I heard stories about, Bible translations into native languages. And all these language connections do filter back to empower people and improve their health. And then the spiritual and philosophical connections. So there are alliances around faith-based endeavors. Like I spoke to a Rabbi Amishay et Salon from America, and he's bringing back some more like earth-based Jewish Indigenous religions. Well, it's like the same religion, but it's like concentrating more on the earth-based elements of that. He's talked to me about treaties that he's been able to brokerage between Indigenous tribes in America and the Jewish people that are formally assigned to actually say, we'll work together. Wayne talks about, you're going to hear more from Wayne later about the Gwich'in people and up on the Arctic Circle, and getting a better understanding of their spiritual astronomy. So there's lots on that category. And then we have some formal networks and leadership endeavours, which of course we're here today because of the Indigenous Embassy Jerusalem, but we also have representatives from the Indigenous Friends of Israel, Norman and Barbara Miller. Ben Levy has developed a global Indigenous network, and all these are important for strengthening leadership amongst Jewish people and also Indigenous people. So, in conclusion, the Indigenous people I spoke to talk passionately about their love for Jewish people and Israel. So, we don't hear enough of this, do we? But, it was very heartening. And the acceptance of Jewish people as the Indigenous people of this country. And we do need to pull together to all, strengthen each other. But, sadly, some of the Jewish people I talk to, they're working together for the good of other Indigenous peoples, but they're kind of going under the radar a bit because they don't necessarily feel safe to come out and say, hey, I'm Jewish. However, Indigenous people have have appreciated the support of Jewish people, and often before formal programs in these countries like Australia, we have formal programs to help close the gap on health for Indigenous people, or to help counteract some of the damage that's been done. But before any of those programs were around, it was the Jewish people that were there for Aboriginal people, helping them, whether it's on the Freedom Ride, which, they're trying to recreate at the moment, Stand Up are trying to recreate that Freedom Ride at the moment, or other endeavours. And there is that inherent mutual allyship, because sometimes when you talk to people about allyship, there's an expectation that white folk, are allies to Indigenous people, we're trying to help them. But what I heard stories of here was true mutual allyship between Indigenous people and Jewish people, recognising, the mutual needs are there both ways. But stories hold power, and I'm hoping these stories will hearten you and enlighten you, and that when I finish the book, you're going to buy it and read a bit more about these stories. And just it's been said before, chazak, chazak, v'nit chazak, be strong, and we will strengthen each other. And I think this is what my project's about. So thank you.